Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. Reclaim 9 wasn't the kind of place you ended up on purpose. The orbital salvage station hung in the void like a metal tumor, all jutting docking arms and repurposed hull sections welded together by people who'd clearly never heard of building codes. Decommissioned warships from 100 different species came here to die, stripped down to their bones by salvage crews who didn't ask questions and didn't tell stories. In the lower decks, where the air recyclers wheezed and the gravity plating flickered on bad days, you could find all sorts of interesting characters trying very hard not to be found. Knox ran a repair shop in Section 12L, which was technically classified as a maintenance corridor, but functioned more like a bazaar for people who needed things fixed and couldn't afford to ask professionals. Her workshop was a beautiful disaster of spare parts, half-finished projects, and equipment that absolutely should not work, but did anyway, because she was just that good. Or that stubborn. Possibly both. She was currently engaged in a philosophical debate with a fuel regulator that had decided to stop regulating fuel. The debate mostly involved her hitting it with a wrench while making increasingly creative threats. "Listen here, you waste of good metal," she said, giving it another solid whack. "You're going to work, or I'm melting you down and turning you into a decorative paperweight." The regulator sparked, hummed indignantly, and started purring like it had never considered malfunctioning in the first place. "That's what I thought," Knox muttered, setting down her wrench with satisfaction. That's when she noticed the 3 Ralnith cubs standing in her doorway, tracking grease across her already filthy floor, and staring at her with the kind of intensity that made most humans nervous. Ralnith were predator stock through and through. 6-limbed, scaled, and furred nightmares that looked like evolution had mixed a panther with a velociraptor and decided to give the result opposable thumbs and a bad attitude. These 3 were young, still sporting the spotted patterns that marked them as juveniles, but their triple iris eyes tracked her every movement with unnerving precision. "Shop's closed," Knox said without looking up, reaching for her coffee mug. The coffee was terrible. She made it using a repurposed coolant recycler because regular coffee makers were boring. But it had caffeine, and that was all that mattered. "Come back, never." The cubs didn't move. Their retractable claws clicked against the metal floor in an irregular rhythm that probably meant something in Ralnith body language, but just sounded like an ominous percussion section to Knox. The smallest one stepped forward. He had a crooked left ear that bent at an odd angle, and his voice carried that adolescent uncertainty that transcended species. "You're the human who fixes impossible things." Knox finally turned to face them fully, leaning against her workbench with her coffee in hand. She was tall for a human woman, all lean muscle and angular features, with short black hair that stuck up in every direction because she had a habit of running grease-covered fingers through it while thinking. Her coveralls were stained with enough different fluids to qualify as a hazmat situation, and her hands were a collection of scars, burns, and perpetual grease that she'd long since stopped trying to scrub away. "I'm the human who charges triple for flattery and quadruple for whatever you're about to ask me to do," she replied, taking a sip of her coffee and immediately regretting it. Still terrible. Still drinking it. "What do you want?" The cub with the crooked ear pulled something from inside his jumpsuit, wrapped carefully in dirty cloth. His 2 companions, a female with notched ear tips and a larger male with a scar cutting across his snout, moved closer, flanking him protectively. They were trying very hard to look intimidating, which might have worked if the female's tail wasn't twitching nervously and giving away her anxiety. "We need you to fix this," the small one said, unwrapping the cloth with movements so careful they bordered on reverent. Knox had seen a lot of broken things. You didn't run a repair shop in the bowels of a salvage station without developing a certain familiarity with destruction. She'd welded hull breaches, rebuilt shattered AI cores, coaxed life back into weapon systems that had been declared dead by 3 different technicians. She'd handled components from ships that had died in battle, machines that had failed at critical moments, equipment that carried the psychic weight of disaster in every bent piece. But when the cub placed his offering on her workbench, she felt something in her chest twist in a way she absolutely did not appreciate. It had been a medal. You could tell from the scrap of ribbon still clinging to it. Military-grade synthetic that didn't burn easily, colored in the black and silver of the Obsidian Collective. The metal itself looked like it had lost an argument with industrial equipment, then been used for target practice, then possibly run over by something heavy, just to make sure it was thoroughly destroyed. The metal was crushed into barely recognizable shapes, the surface melted and scarred, whatever emblem or inscription it once carried completely obliterated. Knox picked it up carefully, turned it over in her scarred hands. The weight was wrong for standard alloy, which meant military issue from one of the upper-tier units. Given the ribbon colors and the exotic metal composition, she was looking at Obsidian Guard hardware. "Where'd you get this?" she asked, still examining the mangled metal under her work light. The 3 cubs exchanged glances, that silent communication that happened between siblings who'd been through things together. The bigger male spoke this time, his voice deeper but still cracking at odd intervals. "It belonged to our parent, Commander Ithmak of the Obsidian Guard." "Well, that explained the high-end materials. The Obsidian Guard was the Collective's elite unit, the ones who got called when regular military wasn't enough. They were the sharp end of the spear, the last line standing between civilians and whatever nightmare had crawled out of the void this week. Knox had never served with them. She'd been regular human fleet, the expendable bodies they threw at problems until the problems went away. But everyone knew the Guard's reputation. "Your parent died in combat." It wasn't a question. You didn't get this kind of damage from anything else. 3 months ago, the female said softly. Her ear tips twitched when she spoke, a nervous tell that reminded Knox painfully of human children trying not to cry. The station officials gave us the service record and some credits. This medal came with the personal effects. It's all we have that actually belonged to them, that they wore. Knox set the medal down gently, studying the damage patterns under bright light. Plasma scoring on the upper edge, where superheated gas had liquefied the metal. Central crushing from kinetic impact, probably shrapnel or debris. Stress fractures consistent with explosive decompression or rapid atmospheric entry. Whatever fight Commander Ithmak had died in, it had been absolutely brutal. "And you want me to restore it," she said, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it anyway. The official repair services said it was too damaged, the small one with the crooked ear said, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. They quoted us prices we couldn't afford, told us it would cost more than the metal was worth, said we should just accept it as is, or let it go. But it's all you have," Knox finished quietly. She could see it in their posture, the way they stood around that broken piece of metal like it was the most precious thing in the universe, because, to them, it was. "I'm guessing you don't have the credits those services wanted." The cubs went very still. Then the big male, she'd later learn his name was Crowbar, reached into a worn satchel and carefully placed 2 items on her workbench. One was a jar of premium synthetic lubricant, the kind that cost more per ounce than most people made in a week. The other was a pack of contraband chewing gum from one of the restricted inner core worlds, still sealed with holographic authenticity marks. "We can pay," Crowbar said, meeting her eyes with desperate pride. "This is worth something." Knox looked at the offering, then at the three cubs in their station-issue gray jumpsuits. Military dependents, living in the ward system, probably sharing a tiny room and eating recycled protein, while they waited to age out of the system's minimal support structure. They'd stolen these items. The security tags were still faintly visible on the lubricant jar because it was all they had to trade. She should say no. The smart move was absolutely to say no, because this job was going to be a nightmare. The metal was made from crystalline metallic hybrid alloy, the kind designed to be nearly indestructible. Fixing it would require precision heat treatment, chemical baths, micro-welding at tolerances measured in nanometers. She'd need the original specifications to recreate the emblems and inscriptions. It would take days of painstaking work, assuming it was even possible. But Knox had never been particularly good at smart moves. "I'll take a look," she said, picking up the metal again and turning it slowly under the light. "No promises. This kind of damage might be beyond even my questionable abilities. But I'll try." The transformation in the cubs was immediate and almost painful to watch. The small one's crooked ear perked up, the female's tail stopped its anxious twitching, and Crowbar's shoulders dropped from their defensive hunch. They looked at her like she'd just offered them the stars, and Knox felt that uncomfortable tightness in her chest intensify. "Thank you," the small one, Rook, she'd learn later, said, his voice cracking with emotion. "Thank you so much. "Yeah, don't get emotional on me," Knox interrupted, waving toward the door. "Come back in a few days. I'll know by then if it's fixable. And take your stolen goods with you. I don't need station security poking around my shop asking questions." "The payment is yours," Crowbar insisted, pushing the items toward her. "We want you to have it." Knox looked at the contraband, at the three earnest faces watching her, and sighed. "Fine. But next time you decide to pay someone with stolen merchandise, maybe pick stuff that doesn't have active security tags." She tapped the nearly invisible marker on the lubricant jar. "I'll dispose of these safely. Now get out of here before someone notices you're in the restricted sectors after curfew." The cubs practically scrambled for the door, all awkward limbs and relieved energy. Rook paused at the threshold, looking back at her with those unsettling triple iris eyes. "Our parent used to say the Obsidian Guard never abandons their own," he said quietly. "I think they'd be glad you're helping us." Then they were gone, the sound of their claws clicking away down the corridor, leaving Knox alone with the destroyed metal and the creeping certainty that she'd just complicated her life in ways she couldn't yet calculate. She picked up the metal again, feeling its weight, studying the damage that told the story of someone's final moments. Commander Ithmak, Obsidian Guard, died 3 months ago protecting people who probably never even learned the commander's name. "Right then," Knox said to her empty workshop, her voice echoing off walls cluttered with salvaged equipment and half-finished projects. "Let's see what you were worth, Commander." She cleared her main workbench, a massive slab of heat-resistant composite she'd salvaged from a scrapped dreadnought, and assembled her precision tools, magnification equipment, micro-welders, chemical analysis gear, and her personal favorite, a scanner she'd built from parts of 3 different machines and sheer determination. First step was understanding exactly what she was working with. Knox placed the metal in the scanner and started running compositional analysis. The readout made her whistle low and impressed. "Okay, Commander, They really valued you, she muttered, watching data scroll across her display. The alloy was top-tier stuff, reserved for elite commendations, designed to survive re-entry heat, resist corrosion from exotic atmospheres, basically last until the heat death of the universe under normal circumstances. The fact that it was this thoroughly destroyed spoke to truly exceptional violence. She began documenting everything systematically. Photos from multiple angles, precise measurements of the distortion, mapping where material was lost versus merely compressed. It was slow, meticulous work that required absolute focus and made time disappear. Knox had learned early that fixing broken things meant understanding their history. Every scratch was a story, every dent a frozen moment, every stress fracture a point where something went catastrophically wrong. She approached repairs like archaeology, uncovering the past one careful layer at a time. The plasma damage on the upper quadrant showed where metal had liquefied and re-solidified in rippling waves. The central crushing came from massive kinetic impact, shrapnel or debris moving at combat speeds. Scoring along the edges matched atmospheric friction patterns, suggesting the commander had been in a situation involving rapid descent or explosive decompression. 3 months ago, Knox pulled up her personal data pad and searched major military actions in that time frame. There, an incident at something called Refuge Run, where Obsidian Guard units had intercepted raiders attacking a civilian transport. The official report was sparse, citing ongoing investigation, but it listed casualties. 5 Guard members killed in action, including Commander Ithmak. She sat back, looking at the medal with new understanding. The commander had died shielding civilians from raiders, had probably taken the hits that damaged this medal while putting their body between attackers and people who couldn't defend themselves. The kind of death that earned posthumous commendations and grateful remembrance. So why were the commander's cubs living in poverty with stolen goods for currency? Knox shook her head, pushing the thought away. Not her problem. Her problem was fixing a piece of metal, not questioning the collective's benefits system. She'd learned that lesson the hard way. Asking too many questions, caring about the wrong things, that's what had cost her everything the first time. She stood, stretched until her spine cracked, and checked the time display. 4 hours had vanished while she worked, which was normal when she fell into a project. Her coffee maker, actually a repurposed coolant recycler because Knox believed in creative equipment use, was still producing its toxic black output in the corner. She poured another cup, grimaced at the taste, drank it anyway. The workshop door chimed. Munch stuck his massive head inside, mandibles clicking in what passed for a Quillen greeting. Munch was one of the few station residents who treated Knox like a normal person instead of a tolerated oddity, probably because he was also a tolerated oddity. 4 arms, chitinous plating, multiple eyes that could focus independently, Quillens were unsettling to most species, which meant Munch fit right in at Reclaim 9. "Heard you had visitors," Munch said, his eyes focusing on the medal. "Small, clawed, definitely not authorized for this sector. Word travels fast. Word travels fast when the visitors steal from Supply Chief Rantha's personal stash." Munch clicked further into the workshop, examining the medal with professional interest. "That's guard issue. High-grade guard issue. Commander Ithmak, killed at Refuge Run 3 months back." Munch's mandibles went still, his version of a wince. The transport incident. Very tragic. Very heroic. Very thoroughly swept under official rugs by everyone except the orphan dependents, apparently. "Apparently," Knox agreed, sipping her terrible coffee. "The cubs want it restored. I said I'd try." You getting soft on me, Knox? Absolutely not. I'm charging them top rates in stolen merchandise and contraband gum. Munch's laugh was a chittering sound that echoed off the walls. You're terrible at being heartless. Anyway, didn't come to critique your terrible personality. Came to warn you, Obsidian Guard inspection team arriving station-side in 2 days. Full sweep, credential checks, contraband searches, the whole intimidating package. Knox's grip tightened on her mug. They say what they're specifically looking for? Officially? Routine inspection? Unofficially? Munch's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Rumor says they're hunting for deserters and discharged personnel violating separation terms. Someone's apparently been running unauthorized military-grade repairs in the station network. Of course, because life couldn't just be simple. Knox had been careful, hadn't taken jobs that would trigger security alerts, hadn't advertised beyond quiet word of mouth. But the guard was thorough. If they started pulling records, her name would surface eventually. Former fleet mechanic, dishonorably discharged for insubordination and unauthorized asset use, currently running a shop that technically violated 6 separation agreement clauses. Thanks for the warning, she said evenly. I'll stay out of sight. You? Stay out of sight? Munch's skepticism was palpable. I'll believe that when the universe ends. Just be careful, yeah? The guard doesn't have a sense of humor about protocol violations. After Munch left, Knox stood alone with the broken medal. 2 days until the guard arrived. 2 days to either finish this repair or abandon it. To either help 3 desperate cubs or protect herself from scrutiny she absolutely could not afford. She picked up the medal, felt its weight, thought about a commander who'd died protecting strangers and left behind children with nothing. Well, Commander, she said quietly to the empty workshop, let's see if I can honor your memory better than the collective bothered to. She placed the medal in a chemical bath solution, beginning the first phase of restoration, and lost herself in work. Outside, the station hummed with endless activity. 1,000 species surviving in the margins, trading and scheming and trying not to be noticed. Somewhere in the military networks, an inspection team prepared to make everyone's life complicated. But in that moment, surrounded by her tools and projects, Knox had something that felt right, in a way nothing had felt right since they'd stripped her rank and kicked her out. She had a mission. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The chemical bath would take 12 hours to work its magic, breaking down surface contaminants and stabilizing the crystalline structure enough for precision work. Knox set timers, triple-checked the solution concentration, then did what she always did when facing a project that scared her. She started taking things apart. Not the metal. That was soaking. No, she turned her attention to a navigation computer someone had brought in last week, claiming it kept routing ships through non-existent jump points. Routine work, the kind she could do while her brain processed harder problems in the background. 6 hours later, wrist deep in navigation matrices and running on her 4th cup of toxic coffee, Knox heard footsteps in the corridor. Not the clicking of Ralnith claws or Munch's chitinous shuffle. These were measured, purposeful, the kind of footsteps that announced authority before their owner even appeared. The woman who entered wore civilian clothes, but she moved like military. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of bearing that suggested she'd spent years giving orders people didn't question. Her face was weathered, scarred along the left cheek, and her eyes swept the workshop with tactical precision before settling on Knox. "You're the mechanic," the woman said. Statement, not question. Knox carefully set down her tools, awareness prickling along her spine. "I'm a mechanic. The mechanic implies uniqueness I haven't earned. The mechanic who takes impossible jobs. The woman moved deeper into the workshop, examining equipment with the gaze of someone who understood what she was seeing. The one who fixed Trader Voss's fusion core after 3 certified technicians declared it irreparable. Trader Voss talks too much. He talks appropriately for someone whose ship you saved from becoming an expensive debris field. The woman stopped at the workbench, where the metal soaked in its chemical bath. Her entire body went still. That's guard issue. Knox measured distances, calculated routes to weapons she'd strategically placed around her workshop. Running wouldn't work. This woman was younger, probably enhanced, definitely trained. Fighting was suicide, which left honesty, or at least a carefully edited version. Repair job, Knox said evenly. Client wants it restored. Your client is 3 Ralnith cubs who can't afford breakfast, let alone restoration of high-grade military commendations. The woman's voice was steady, controlled, but something flickered behind her eyes. Commander Ithmac's dependents. You knew the commander. I served under Ithmac for 8 years. Best commanding officer I ever had. The woman's jaw tightened. Died shielding civilians while command dithered over engagement protocols. Got a posthumous commendation and a state funeral the Cubs weren't even allowed to attend because they're wards of the station now. Not family. The bitterness in those words told Knox everything about how the Guard had handled its hero's death. Heroic in public, convenient in private. The Cubs were probably an embarrassing reminder that heroes had families, dependencies, complications that didn't fit neat propaganda narratives. I'm just fixing a medal, Knox said carefully. No. The woman pulled something from her jacket. Credentials, military grade. Captain Sarah of the Obsidian Guard inspection team currently approaching the station. You're fixing a symbol. And symbols matter, especially to Cubs who lost everything. She studied Knox with uncomfortable intensity. I know who you are. Former fleet mechanic Knox, discharged after the Titan's Reach incident. Court-martialed for insubordination, unauthorized use of military assets, and a dozen other charges that basically mean you valued lives over orders. Knox's stomach dropped. So what now? You arrest me? Shut down my shop? Now? Captain Sarah smiled, sharp and dangerous. Now you finish that medal, and when my inspection team arrives tomorrow, you'll be somewhere else entirely. Consider it professional courtesy. One person who gave a damn about the right things to another. She turned to leave, paused at the door. Ithmac would have liked you, she said quietly. Make it perfect. Then she was gone, leaving Knox alone with impossible expectations and a rapidly approaching deadline. Knox didn't sleep. Sleep was for people who weren't on a countdown to either finish an impossible restoration or face military scrutiny that could land them in detention. Instead, she drank more terrible coffee, recalibrated her equipment, and waited for the chemical bath to finish its work. At hour 11, she pulled the metal from the solution. The surface contaminants were gone, revealing the full extent of the damage in merciless detail. Worse than she'd initially assessed. The central emblem, what she assumed had been the Obsidian Guard insignia, was completely obliterated. The inscription along the lower edge was melted into unreadable ripples. One corner was missing entirely, vaporized by whatever had killed Commander Ithmac. Right, Knox muttered, placing the metal under her magnification array. No pressure. Just restore a priceless military commendation with incomplete materials and no original specifications. Totally reasonable. She started with structural restoration. The crystalline metallic hybrid alloy required precise heat treatment to restore its original properties. Too hot and the crystalline matrix would shatter. Too cool, and the metal wouldn't properly fuse. She had maybe a 3-degree margin for error. Knox fired up her microforge, another piece of salvaged equipment she'd rebuilt from components that absolutely weren't designed to work together. The heating element glowed blue-white, casting sharp shadows across her workspace. She secured the metal in a specialized vise, positioned her micro-welder with hands that were absolutely steady despite the coffee overdose, and began. The work required total concentration. Each pass of the welder had to follow the metal's natural grain structure, coaxing compressed material back into shape molecule by molecule. She worked in sections, heating and forming, allowing cooling periods, checking progress with equipment accurate to nanometer tolerances. 4 hours in, she'd restored the basic shape. The metal looked less like abstract tragedy and more like something that had once meant something to someone. But the missing corner remained missing, and the destroyed emblem was still just scarred metal. That's when things got complicated. She couldn't recreate the original without specifications. The Obsidian Guard's insignia was proprietary military iconography, not exactly available through public databases. But Knox had learned during her fleet years that military organizations were predictable. They standardized everything, documented obsessively, and, crucially, never completely purged their archives even when they thought they had. She pulled up her heavily modified data terminal and started diving into networks she absolutely wasn't authorized to access. The Guard's public databases were locked tight. But public databases were never the whole story. Every military organization had legacy systems, old protocols, maintenance records that nobody remembered to secure properly because they seemed too mundane to matter. Knox found what she needed in a decommissioned maintenance scheduling system that still had active connections to current networks. Someone had uploaded equipment inspection reports that included detailed photos of dress uniforms because inspectors needed to verify proper insignia placement. The photos showed medals, including the exact commendation Commander Ithmac had received. "Gotcha," Knox whispered, downloading the images before anyone noticed the EEP, unauthorized access. The Obsidian Guard insignia was elegant, a stylized shield overlaid with crossed weapons, surrounded by script in old collective formal language. The inscription on Ithmac's specific medal read, "For valor beyond measure, defense of refuge run, awarded posthumously." Posthumously. They'd given the commander a medal after death, something pretty to put in archives while the commander's cubs lived on stolen protein bars and desperate hope. Knox felt anger crystallize in her chest, cold and sharp. She channeled it into focus. The missing corner couldn't be replaced. She didn't have matching alloy, but she could fill it with something else, something that would honor the absence rather than hide it. She mixed a composite from 3 different materials, standard hull plating from human vessels, Ralnith ceremonial metal she'd acquired in trade, and a fragment of crystalline matrix from her own discharged service badge that she'd kept for reasons she'd never examined too closely. The mixture was symbolic garbage from an engineering perspective, but symbols mattered. Captain Sarah had said so. She welded the composite into place with precision that bordered on obsessive, creating a patch that was clearly different from the original, but integrated seamlessly. The repair was visible. You could see where new met old, but it looked deliberate, intentional, like the damage was being acknowledged rather than erased. Next came the emblem. Knox used her microlaser to etch the insignia onto the restored surface, working from the reference photos with painstaking accuracy. Each line had to be perfect. The crossed weapons, the shield's curve, the formal script, all of it recreated at microscopic scale. 8 hours into the emblem work, her hands started shaking from exhaustion and caffeine overload. She forced herself to stop, breathe, drink water instead of coffee for once in her life. The chronometer showed she had 6 hours until Captain Sarah's inspection team arrived. Enough time. Barely. She returned to the work, hands steady again, and completed the insignia as station lighting shifted from night cycle dimness to day cycle brightness outside her workshop. The emblem emerged line by line, exactly as it had appeared in those archival photos, exactly as Commander Ithmac would have worn it. The inscription was last. Knox etched each character of old collective script with reverent precision, remembering every ceremony she'd attended in her fleet days, every time someone had received recognition that actually meant something. For valor beyond measure, Defense of Refuge Run, awarded posthumously, but she added something. Below the official inscription, in letters so small they'd be nearly invisible without magnification, she etched, "Remembered by Rook, Crowbar, and Sketch, worth more than medals." Sketch. She'd named the female cub based on her ear notches. They'd never properly introduced themselves, too focused on their desperate mission. Finally, after 23 hours of continuous work, Knox lifted the completed medal from her workbench and examined it under bright light. It was perfect. And it absolutely wasn't. The damage was still visible. You could see where metal had been crushed and reformed, where the composite patch filled the missing corner, where plasma scoring had permanently altered the surface texture. But instead of looking destroyed, it looked transformed. The scars had become part of its story, integrated into something that honored both what it had been and what it had survived. Knox attached a new ribbon, military-grade synthetic in obsidian guard colors, that she'd traded for at prices she didn't want to calculate. The medal hung properly now, weighted correctly, ready to be worn or displayed as the cubs chose. She was placing it carefully in a protective case when her proximity sensors chimed. Multiple contacts approaching through the corridors. Military precision spacing. The inspection team. Knox grabbed the metal case, locked down her workshop with security protocols that would discourage casual intrusion, and slipped into the maintenance tunnels she'd mapped during her first week on Reclaim 9. The station's infrastructure was a maze of access corridors, ventilation shafts, and forgotten passages that only people like her, people who fixed things, ever learned properly. She navigated by memory through the darkness, hearing the inspection team's systematic sweep echoing through walls, and emerged 3 sections away in a communal area where station residents gathered for meals and gossip. The cubs were there, all 3 of them, sitting at a corner table and pretending to eat recycled protein, while clearly watching her workshop's section with anxious intensity. Knox approached quietly, set the case on their table, and watched 3 pairs of triple iris eyes go wide. "Finished early," she said simply. "Thought you might want it before things got complicated." Rook opened the case with trembling hands. The metal caught the overhead lighting, its restored surface gleaming, its scars telling stories that mattered. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Then Sketch made a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh, and Crowbar's tale did something complex that Knox didn't understand but recognized as emotional. "It's perfect," Rook whispered, carefully lifting the metal like it might dissolve if handled roughly. "It's exactly... you even fixed." "Read the inscription," Knox said. "The small one." Rook peered closer, his eyes focusing with that unsettling Ralnith precision. When he read the hidden text, his expression did something complicated. "You remembered our names," he said softly. "We never told you our names." Workshop gossip travels fast. Also, you're not exactly subtle when you steal from Supply Chief Rantha. Knox managed a tired smile. Your parent was worth remembering properly. This felt appropriate. Crowbar stood suddenly, moving with that liquid predator grace, and did something Knox didn't expect. He pressed his forehead against her shoulder in what she recognized as a Rolnith gesture of profound respect and gratitude. "Our parents served honorably," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've honored them when their own service wouldn't. We won't forget this." "Yeah, well..." Knox stepped back awkwardly, uncomfortable with gratitude she didn't feel she'd earned. "Just stay out of trouble. And maybe stop stealing from people who'll notice." She left them there. 3 cubs gathered around a restored medal that meant everything and nothing, and disappeared back into the maintenance tunnels before the inspection team could spot her. Captain Sarah found her 6 hours later in a different workshop 3 sections away that Knox had borrowed from a friend who asked no questions. "The cubs have their medal," Sarah said without preamble. "My team swept your actual workshop. Found nothing actionable, though we both know what we would have found yesterday." "Lucky timing," Knox replied. "Very lucky." Sarah handed her a data chip. "Inspections complete. We're leaving station side tomorrow. This contains Commander Ithmac's full service record. The real one, not the sanitized version. Thought the cubs might want to know what their parent actually did. What they actually meant." Knox took the chip carefully. "Why are you helping?" "Because Ithmac saved my life twice, and I couldn't even attend the funeral. Because the cubs deserve better than being bureaucratic inconveniences. Because people like you, who actually give a damn, are rare enough that they should be protected when possible." Sarah's expression was complicated. Also, because fixing that medal was worth more than any official commendation ever could be. You gave them their parent back. That matters. After Sarah left, Knox sat alone in the borrowed workshop, holding a data chip containing a dead hero's true story, and wondered when exactly she'd stopped being someone who avoided complications. The answer, she suspected, was that she'd never really been that person at all. She'd just been waiting for the right complication to care about. The data chip burned in Knox's pocket for 2 days before she worked up the courage to deliver it. She told herself she was busy. Legitimate work had piled up. Her actual paying customers needed attention, and the inspection team's departure didn't mean she could just waltz around the station without caution. Station security still existed, and her discharge papers still marked her as someone who shouldn't be operating military-grade equipment. But really, she was stalling because she knew what would happen when she gave the cubs their parents' real service record. She'd become part of their story. Not just the mechanic who fixed a broken thing, but someone who mattered to them in ways that couldn't be easily walked away from. Knox had built her entire, post-military existence on being someone people could walk away from. She found them in their assigned quarters on Level 8, the residential section reserved for military dependents and wards of the station. The room was exactly as depressing as she'd expected. 12 square meters of gray walls, bunked sleeping platforms, a communal hygiene station shared with 6 other rooms, and storage lockers that probably held everything the cubs owned in this universe. The restored medal hung on the wall above Rook's bunk, displayed in a frame they'd clearly made themselves from salvaged materials. It caught the room's harsh lighting like a declaration of pride against the institutional bleakness. "You came back," Sketch said, looking up from a data pad where she'd been working on what appeared to be station maintenance certification coursework. The notches in her ears twitched with pleased surprise. "Had something for you." Knox pulled out the data chip, held it up so they could see. Commander Ithmac's full service record, the real one, with all the classified missions and actual combat reports, figured you deserved to know what your parent actually accomplished. The transformation in the room's atmosphere was immediate. All three cubs moved closer, their attention focused with that unnerving predator intensity. Crowbar took the chip like it was made of spun glass. "This is restricted material," he said slowly. "How did you—" "Don't ask questions you don't want answered," Knox interrupted. "Just know that someone who served with your parent thought you should have it. Someone who understood what Commander Ithmac actually meant beyond the official propaganda." Rook was already moving toward the room's battered data terminal, the kind of obsolete equipment stations dumped on wards because functional was good enough. He inserted the chip with shaking hands, and the screen flickered to life with the Obsidian Guard's classified file header. Knox watched their faces as they began reading, saw the moment they realized their parent hadn't just been a soldier, but a legend. 16 major engagements, 4 successful evacuations under hostile fire, 2 ship-to-ship boarding actions that had ended sieges everyone else had written off as unwinnable, a career built on being the person who went into impossible situations and brought people out alive. "They saved an entire colony," Sketch breathed, her claws clicking against the screen as she scrolled through combat footage. "The Zareth raid on New Prosperity. Our parent held a defensive position for 6 hours against overwhelming force while civilians evacuated. 6 hours. Alone for the last 90 minutes, Crowbar added, his voice hollow with awe. The rest of the unit had been killed or wounded. Commander Ithmac held the position alone." Rook wasn't reading anymore. He was staring at the medal on the wall, his crooked ear flat against his head, in what Knox had learned was deep emotion. "And they gave us recycled protein and a 12-meter room. That's what a hero's family gets." The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut. Knox recognized it. She'd carried that same bitterness after her discharge, after the court-martial that had stripped away everything she'd earned because she'd chosen to save lives instead of follow orders that would have gotten people killed. "The medal matters more than what they gave you," Knox said quietly. "You know why? Because you 3 cared enough to find someone to fix it. Because you valued it when official channels told you to let it go. That's worth more than any station housing or benefits package." "Is it?" Sketch looked at her with those unsettling eyes. "Is it really worth more when we go hungry some nights and share 3 jumpsuits between us, because that's all we rate as wards?" Knox didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound like empty platitudes. She'd been hungry too. She'd owned nothing but what fit in a duffel bag. She knew exactly how hollow noble sentiments felt when your stomach was empty. But she also knew something else. "Your parent held a position for 6 hours against impossible odds," she said instead. "Alone for the last 90 minutes. You want to know what that means? It means Commander Ithmac was someone who didn't give up even when giving up made sense, even when it would have been easier." She met their gazes steadily. "You 3 tracked me down, stole contraband to pay me, and refused to accept that the metal was too damaged to fix. You're exactly your parents' cubs." Crowbar's tail did that complex motion again. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your parent fought impossible odds for people who needed defending. Maybe it's your turn to fight." Knox pulled out another item she'd been carrying, a station employment application for junior maintenance positions. "I need apprentices. The work's dirty, the hours are terrible, and I'm a nightmare to work for. But it pays actual credits, comes with meal stipends, and you'll learn skills that matter." She set the application on their makeshift table. "Think about it. Or don't. Your choice." But stop being victims of what the station thinks you're worth, and start being who your parent raised you to be. Then she left, before they could respond, before she could see whether her words meant anything or just sounded like another adult making promises she couldn't keep. Outside, the station hummed with its endless activity. Somewhere in the military networks, Captain Sarah's inspection team was filing reports that probably didn't mention a dishonorably discharged mechanic, or 3 cubs who mattered more than bureaucracy acknowledged. And in a 12-meter room on level 8, 3 young Ralnith stared at an employment application and a restored medal, and maybe, just maybe, began believing they could be more than what grief and regulations had made them.